Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Welcome to The Call to Justice. I'm Amos Jones, your host, and I am happy to welcome you live from the Prince George's County, Maryland studios of WBGR, Believing in God Radio, The Call to Justice, streaming now to 750,000 Roku subscribers and beyond. Today's program focuses on civic engagement and the building blocks of civil society. We'll start with a powerful linkage between the 19th century order of the United States of America right into the present 21st century. And we are pleased in that connection to welcome first up today a powerful woman, a woman of service, who's a scion of one of the most fearless and tenacious Americans of all time. We have the great-great-granddaughter of the historic plaintiff and Supreme Court litigant Dred Scott. That's right, a great-great-granddaughter live from St. Louis, the person of Lynne Scott, who is the founder and executive director of the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation in St. Louis. Lynne Jackson, welcome to The Call to Justice. We are so grateful to have you and that you have taken the time live on a weekend to join us with all you've been doing over the last 17 years now, since 2006, and even these weekends of October of dedications. Welcome. Tell our audience about your great-great-grandfather, Dred Scott, his wife, Harriet, and you, Lynne Jackson.
Wow, that's quite an introduction. Thank you, Amos, for having me on your show. It's an honor to talk with you and your audience. Thank you. Well, I am a great-great-granddaughter of Dred and Harriet Scott. And Dred Scott was a courageous but very simple man who knew that he had the right to his freedom. And when he was told that he would not be allowed to have his freedom, he sued in the courts. That came about by the fact that there was a law called once free, always free. And in Missouri, that was the case, and it had been upheld. Dred Scott and Harriet had both lived at Fort Snelling in the Minnesota territories of where St. Paul is now. And in that area, they were free, living there, but as servants to Dr. John Emerson. When they came back to St. Louis and Dr. Emerson died, his widow, Irene Emerson, would not let them have their freedom. Again, I say have their freedom, which they already had by law. And it was that part of the story that is really important to understand. He wasn't suing to get free. He was suing because he was free.
Yes.
And him started the Dred Scott case.
And the Dred Scott case is taught even now probably in fifth grade American history because it's a looming disgrace to the American constitutional order. The rule of law has been summarized, and you've heard it, as the Negro has no right that the white man is bound to respect. And it is so fitting that you come this month to our program out of this heritage, in that we have faced the Supreme Court just this term, and we have seen them deny cases that bring these very issues of black citizenship, black equal protection of law. Are you going to apply the law as it's written and as it's supposed to be applied to black people, especially as challenging whites and others? And the answer to this day, we've argued, and we've seen results suggesting it's still the same answer as it was in 1857, or at least it's back to the same answer, and that is no, the Negro does not have any right that the white man is bound to respect. That's the controversial conclusion of some of the Supreme Court denials of review that we've seen just this month. So how long was Dred Scott in court? This was 1846. Fort Snelling is around Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he once free, always free. He was in a free territory. His masters were there a long time, but he was in court battling all the way up to the Supreme Court. How many years, Lynne?
It took 11 years and 5 court proceedings for him to get the answer that not was he free because of that law, but the conclusion was based on citizenship, and they determined that he was not a citizen because he was of African descent. And the Dred Scott decision did not just impact Dred and Harriet, but all African Americans, and truly everyone, honestly, because we know what the outcome of all of that was.
The
but
Civil
11
War.
years.
Yes.
11 years. Yeah.
11 years. And so in 1857, Justice Taney, who had a statue in his honor in the state of Maryland here until 2017, the disgraceful justice who wrote that, he was a man of his time. But it didn't have to be that way. That's how the case got to the Supreme Court. There were plenty of abolitionists and people who thought that the rights matter, the contract principles and common law and everything else. And the very next year, your great-great-grandfather died, didn't he, in 1858? But he had his Harriet, and she was a freedom fighter in her own right. Tell us about Harriet Scott, your great-great-grandmother married to Dred Scott.
We believe truly, based on the fact that, we have descendants, and, people tend to be like their ancestors a bit, a very determined and very strong-willed woman in her own right. And what a lot of people do not know about her is that she herself filed for her freedom independent of Dred. A totally separate suit was filed the same day, same time, same place at the old courthouse in St. Louis, where her name was on her petition to sue. So they really had two cases going through the courts at the same time up until a point when they were merged together. And Harriet made a wonderful decision to do that based on the fact that so goes the mother, so goes the child. They had two daughters, Eliza and Lizzie, and those two girls would be free if their mother won her case, even if the father did not win, or if, for God's sake, he had passed away. There would still be a case in the court to help them gain their freedom.
It sounds like the scene from the autobiography of Hannah Pitkin, which is thought to have been fictionalized, but it was realistic because the baby is held up and the question of the slave parent is posed, is you the one? And so I think about these black people in slavery, and I still say slaves. I don't say enslaved person because the term slave is very efficient, and that's what the historical time immemorial designation has been throughout history of the world. So I am a descendant of slaves. And yes, they were enslaved, but I prefer not to have a past participle that makes me defined by what a white, morally inferior master did to me. There's, to me, honor in slavery. We see that in the Bible. And so the fact of the matter is we were slaves, and yet we still had children. And the race went on, those instincts of parental protection and for provision of issue down through the ages. And so Harriet lost her case as well. And a biography came out on her by Elisa Vandervelde around 2010-ish. I wrote a review of that in the Christian Review Books and Culture. That was the literary periodical, if you will, of the books of the Christianity Today magazine. And when that book came out, it was so important, and we have an image of the cover of that book, Mrs. Dred Scott, about Harriet, because it made clear this was a family affair. They used to say in slavery that at some of the wedding vows, religiously, you would pledge until death or distance do you part, because the marriage could be shattered by the sale of one of the spouses out of slavery somewhere far, far away. And what's interesting is that even then, Lynn, we had our moral authority, because if you read the written history of the old, well-known Green Street Baptist Church of Louisville, organized in 1844 by slaves, and one of the few black churches so old to have a complete written history of itself, there was a requirement when blacks were freed that they had to go get their marriage licenses within a few days, or the church wouldn't recognize their marriage. So it's fascinating that even in the face of oppression, we kept our moral principles and our duties to family, to do something for our children and grandchildren front and center. So she lost, but Lynn Jackson, here you are. Who are you? You descended from, it said that Dred Scott had 4 children. I guess 2 of them died in infancy. So you're a descendant of one of those 2 women who survived, the 2 girls. Tell me a little about your heritage, and then we're going to talk about what the foundation has been doing since its origins around 2006, and all of the great work that happened in St. Louis in the way of monuments and memorials this month. So first, who are you? How do you fit in terms of lineage? And then how have you come to found with others and grow with others, rather, this Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, which you can discover at dredscottlibs.org, www.dredscottlibs.org. Lynn, tell us who you are to Dred Scott Heritage.
I'm very, very blessed to be in this lineage, and I had no idea most of my life that I was going to be doing this. But in 1995, God kind of tapped me on the head, and literally in my spirit, I heard him say, "You should study Dred Scott." And it just made sense. I said out loud, "Yeah, I should. I should know more than the average person." So I began my own research, because in the family, we knew the general understanding that he was important, and, you know, he's a slave, he's sued, he lost, and it was important. That was like, you know, the headlines. But I wanted to know more. And so for many years, I just filled in blanks when I had time. But I didn't know that God had tapped me on the shoulder, particularly to start the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation, which we did in 2006. And I thought we were going to commemorate 150th anniversary in 2007. And because there was no statue of him anywhere in the world, which I could not believe, I said, well, we have to fix that too. So that was my mission. We did it under the mission of commemoration, education, and reconciliation. When he told me to use those three words, I thought, okay, I got the first two. That's pretty simple.
Commemoration, education, and reconciliation. Okay.
The third one was like, really? What am I supposed to do with that exactly? I had no idea, but I heard it, and I said, well, if he said it, that's what we're going to put down. So we did. And reconciliation has become a huge part of what we've done, and we'll share that in a few minutes. But the foundation is, it's thriving, and here we are in 2023. I had no idea, again, that this is going to just change my life, honestly, because prior to that, who am I? I'm somebody who just loves the Word of God, and yes. I don't like to say I'm a scholar because I didn't go to school, but I will stand up with the best of them and hold my own, I'm pretty sure, because I love to teach the Bible. Yes. And so that was my life, along with, as you know, we both worked at Brian Cave Law Firm, and I always give them kudos because they just let me go when I was there and started the foundation, and so it was beautiful.
I remember, Lynn mentioned Brian Cave. Brian Cave is an international law firm that's one of the oldest of the great firms of America, 1873, just celebrating 150 years. And that's where I started my legal career. And I spent 3 years there, 3 wonderful years. And I have friends there. And I actually met Lynne remotely because she was at headquarters in St. Louis. I was in the Washington office, but we met after the Dred Scott stuff came up. So it just so happened that we worked in the same firm, and this was just getting really going around 2009, 2010. I joined the firm in 2007, summered there in 2005 and 2006. And so Lynne was a major administrator in the St. Louis headquarters, but also if you work for the right law firm, and I'm saying this for my legal viewers and the young people, make sure you join the kind of firm with the kind of people who share your values. So I joined a Midwestern firm. I knew that the chairman of the firm's father had been a preacher. It turns out the man who would become our managing partner in Washington and my mentor, whom I got to select the next week, became the managing partner of that office. Wonderful man, Rod Page. And it really made sense for me to, I say, dance with the one who brung you. So for those of you who are thinking, well, how do you do a Dred Scott Heritage Foundation while you have a full-time job, especially if you're not a professional historian? Well, you go where the Holy Spirit guides you professionally, avocationally, romantically, and everything else, and you'll find that where God guides, God provides. And some things are for a season. I went on to become a professor in 2017, not even planning to do so. Lynne founded the African American Trust for Historic Preservation. So here we are, back, you and I, these years later. Also, I've learned that Lynne and I have in common biblical apologetics. And so this is going to be we're going to have you back. It's not over yet today, though, because I want to talk about these monuments and also how this journey of yours from understanding, let me learn about Dred Scott, to actually doing something, to actually putting something together. You can read about all the wonderful work, again, at www.dredscottlives.org. Lynn, tell us about these monuments that have gone up this month and how what that means to the community and to reconciliation and some of the programmatic work, including given current events with the rumors of war and wars and things going on around the world. How does this all fit together right now?
Well, that's a big order, and I know we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to share this portion of your question.
We can go a little long. It's okay.
Okay, so I am going to share this. First of all, Dred Scott was freed in 1857. He lived a year and a half, a free man. And some places you'll see 9 months, but I say give him every day he earned. So on September 17th, 1857, he died. That is Constitution Day, and that is noteworthy. God has a sense of humor. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are often called the Dred Scott Amendments because they came out of the Civil War, which his case was a major catalyst for.
He died on, did you say Constitution Day?
Yes, I did.
And it was 1858 when he died. Folks, his friend bought his freedom for him. The Supreme Court told him he could go to you-know-where in 1857, but that same year, his friend bought his freedom, and he lived a free man, Lynn says, about a year and a half, and died on Constitution Day, 1858. Wow. That's a Kairos moment.
It is. It truly is. And that's one of the pins I like to be sure I get in the story so people understand that, there are no coincidences. And as we move forward, he died and was buried in Western Cemetery in St. Louis, which is right where St. Louis University is. That cemetery was abandoned, and Taylor Blow, the son of a former owner, his original owner, bought him specifically to free him. We don't have time to tell that whole story about how it is he ended up buying him, but that's a story by itself. And he did. He freed him on May 26th in the courts. He bought two $1,000 freedom bonds. So the family was free. Dred lived a year and a half. He was buried at Wesleyan, and he lay there until 1867, but that cemetery was about to be abandoned. So this same Taylor Blow had him moved to Calvary Cemetery. And Calvary is a beautiful Catholic cemetery. Primarily, slaves could only be buried there if their owners said so, etc. So he was able to get him buried there. But he lay there for 90 years, unmarked. At the 100th anniversary, unmarked. At the 100th anniversary in 1957, a modest headstone was put there for him by the granddaughter of the man who freed him and had him buried there, and bought 3 plots for him because he could not be buried next to a white person. To ensure that, Taylor Blow had to buy 2 plots on either side of him.
Segregation was alive and well spatially. The famous case Shelley versus Kramer, these residential covenant things out of these regions. And so we have a whole convoluted way in which one must go about preserving the memory of one's friend even 90 years later. We thought we learned from the Civil War in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that were supposed to have conferred full citizenship upon blacks. But the Supreme Court took that away too in the 1880s. That was your federal Supreme Court that invalidated all this progress that the good American people voted through for us, black people, and their elected officials voted that through for us, and our soldiers, black and white, won the Civil War for us. But the Supreme Court and judges, unelected lifetime appointees with political appointments, these judges come in and tear it all down. You have to watch these judges with lifetime appointments in these political patronage jobs they hold for life. So that's my view, not Lynn Jackson's. But Lynn, so all this drama to get him. So then there was a proper headstone, but it still didn't say that much. We have an image, and I want to thank our engineer today. Our engineer got sprung a bunch of these images by me an hour and a half before showtime. And he has managed to download these. Devin, the engineer, is one of the greatest production people you can ask for, and he's putting this together as we speak. Because I had it coming in so close to the showtime. And so we have the old, smaller headstone that I hope you all are able to see. And if not, that's okay. Lynn, tell us how we went from that to the grand, beautiful one that's been set up just very recently this month so that there's I even saw benches. So I want to know how we went from that short one that was very nice to the what you now have in this gorgeous, handsome monument.
Well, it's a beautiful story, but the thumbnail version is that Father Dowling, a Jesuit priest, located in the records of Calvary exactly where Dred Scott was, not knowing he was there at all. Thinking this was very important, he felt there should be a headstone. He contacted my father, and on our website somewhere, there's a picture of my mom and dad, brother, myself, very, very little children. And with his cane, he's pointing out where Dred Scott was buried. He said, I want to get a headstone. It'll be modest, but if someday anyone ever wants to do more, they'll at least know where he lay. Our family kind of knew where he was previously, but the world did not know. And so the little girl in that picture was me, and that's the person who said, okay, I love this, that there is a headstone, but it doesn't say enough, and it's hard to find. It was 28 inches high, 24 inches wide, and I felt that once I was sure and had been told that Dred Scott is one of the top three, if not the most asked for gravesite, and it will be now, I think, that is at Calvary, out of 300,000 people. Then I said, there needs to be more. And I felt this many years ago, but when COVID came and we had to cancel our fundraiser, which we're still trying to recover from, we felt, well, okay, let's do a GoFundMe. And we started a GoFundMe, but then also the Mellon Foundation stepped up with a wonderful grant that they had just instituted for monuments and helped us go over. And that, so we were able to put this 9-foot high, 10 by 10 base because of the 3 grave sites. Keep that in mind. 10 by 10, 9-foot high black granite, 2-sided monument that favors a courthouse. It has his image on it, and probably you're looking at it if you're online here. It is a stunning, and I was sure of what I needed it to look like, but I didn't know it was going to be as stunning as it actually is. It has quotes, it has Bible verses, it has portions of a eulogy from the New York Times, and a baby is buried with Dred Scott, Gates Madison, because both Harriet and Dred have babies that were interred, grandchildren, with them in their grave sites.
Wow.
So that happened on September 30th at Calvary Cemetery in St. Louis.
So on September 30th, just days ago, the pictures you might be looking at indicate that we have a true monument that befits this grand freedom fighter. Somebody you said that he didn't win the battle, but he won the war in the final analysis. Before you go, Lynne, tell us, one, you mentioned your father, and I don't know whether it's your father or mother whose great-grandparents were Dred and Harriet Scott, but whichever line that came through, I wonder what it's like growing up knowing that here stood an entire family, and here rests an entire family. Think twice about cremation, folks, by the way. Think twice about creation. We buried my mother this year, and I'll have another thing to say about that at the end with the hymn of invitation. But think twice before you burn up a body and put it in an urn. And forever on someone's mantle or whatever, which tends to go away with their death. But you managed to preserve and grow up Dred Scott, steeped in American heritage and history. I want to know what that's like, and then tell us what's next, and we're going to go to the next guest as we close out. Those two things, and we're going to have you back to go into the collaborations, because if you're talking about Mellon providing money for this, you're looking at the kind of reconciliation and, frankly, compensation that's necessary when we're talking about chattel slavery from the cradle to the grave and then some. So growing up in the Scott lineage and knowing who you are, as well as where we go from here with the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation at dredscottlives.org, and we're going to have you back. So just tell us those couple of things, and we're going to go to the next guest.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer the ones I can quickly speak to. First, let me back up, and I apologize. I didn't tell you how I'm related. My father is the great-grandson. So I tell people that Dred Scott's grandson is my grandfather.
Yes.
And that's a very easy way to understand how I'm related to him.
I'm going to cut in because did you know your grandfather in that line?
No, he died in 1931 and left my grandmother with 7 children.
Mm-hmm.
So no,
did your grandmother know Dred or Harriet Scott?
Oh, no. Dred died in 1857, Harriet in 1876, but my grandmother was born in 1890.
Okay. I asked because my father's grandfather knew his grandfather. So there are direct stories that can be told because they didn't die. They had long lives and did not die.
Long lives,
and they were older. My father wasn't my father was 38 when I was, so it was a little harder because he was technically older than others. So my grandfather, I never knew either of my grandfathers. They both died years before I was, one of them longer than the other. Okay, good.
On the other side, I do, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's still the heritage and the family reality. Finally, what's next? What's on the horizon? You had a big month for both Dred and Harriet Scott. When I'm in St. Louis, I'm going to make a beeline to Calvary Cemetery and go right there on my capacity as African American Trust for Historic Preservation Executive Director, as well as host of The Call to Justice. What's next for the foundation as you depart this weekend, Lynne Jackson?
Well, 2 things quickly. We have a Dred Scott stamp campaign on our website because there is no stamp of Dred Scott. We have Bart Simpson and a whole lot of other people, horses, dogs, Elvis, etc., but no Dred Scott stamp. So please download a petition and get it signed and mail it to us. But the other big thing is that we are in a mall in a beautiful spot right now for an office space, which is a nice open center, but we will be moving in August of 2024. So what's next is finding another location, and we were hoping that if it's God's will, that maybe we'll have a Dred Scott International Education and Reconciliation Center.
I'm pledging right now. Tell me about that Dred Scott International Reconciliation Center. Did I get it right?
Education and Reconciliation.
Education and Reconciliation. Mark down the African American Trust for Historic Preservation supports this initiative sight unseen. We will be raising money for you folks. This needs to happen yesterday. Continue. I cut you off.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I thank you because I want to share one thing under this umbrella that in all of these years, I wanted to find the Tawney family, and I wanted to find other descendants of famous people.
The Maryland family of the Supreme Court Justice.
Yeah, I want to tell you about that in just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, so I found several of them, and we have what we call Dred Scott Presents Sons and Daughters of Reconciliation. And among them are the nephew and niece of Chief Justice Roger B. Tawney, who said they have no rights. These are wonderful people, and they are so real about the situation and their position in this, and they're very dear friends of mine. Also, we have Jefferson Davis's great-great-grandson. We have Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings' great-great-grandson. We have descendants from Martin Luther King. We have, I've actually worked with a Harriet Tubman descendant once. Also, we have Abraham Lincoln. We have Ulysses S. Grant. And so we have myriads of people, Frederick Douglass, who I have done programs with and are doing programs. We have signature panels. We have Plessy, Ferguson, and Brown, absolutely. So all of these have worked with our organization as Sons and Daughters of Reconciliation, and we present our stories to share how they are connected, how they're interconnected, and how everyone has a heart for peace and a heart for God. It's amazing. And so this is a special time in history, and the Reconciliation Center that we're talking about will help house those programs as well as many other things.
If ever we needed reconciliation in this world, we surely do need it now. I want to thank Lynne Jackson for coming on our air. I want to thank her for her time. I want to thank her for her tireless service in the nonprofit space, making sure that this story, this heritage is not just told, but that the energy and inspiration from it are activated such that we might reconcile. We thank her for her service. We see what's next. You can go and support the Dred Scott Heritage Foundation in that great work at www.dredscottlives.org. Now we turn on this theme of civil society and building the kind of world in which we can all be interdependent and live. We have our next guest, who stands as one of the more contemplative people, but one of the most contemplative students whom I had the pleasure of teaching in my very first year as a professor at North Carolina Central School of Law. I knew that Andrew Dykers was going to do a lot of important and transformative work from his creative mindset as a musician, but from his thoughtful approach to constitutional law, which is where I learned of his way of going about interacting in the world and his insistence on making the laws of localities live up to what they promised, whether it be zoning or other things. This is a man, Andrew Dykers, who now finds himself as a practitioner of law, as a thought leader, and as an activator of the principles of representative democracy. Andrew Dykers, welcome to the program. It is so gratifying to watch people like you making their mark in the world. You are living out constitutional law and representative democracy, two pillars of this great constitutional republic we have. Welcome to the program, Andrew.
Professor Jones, thank you so much for that introduction.
In a nutshell, tell us about your life and your professional story, and then how you grew politically active to running for the North Carolina House of Representatives as an independent. Take it away, Andrew.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for your inspiration as a professor and mentor. I was born in North Carolina. I was raised in South Carolina. Came back up here to North Carolina for undergraduate school at UNC Chapel Hill. And then I started making money playing music, and that took me all over the country and had me working with all kinds of amazing people. And then, without going too much into it, it was mostly having to tend to family matters that largely took me off the road, and then led me to law school. And I was thinking about it. There were things early in life that I worked on. I was interested in, had social activist tendencies in high school and whatnot, but I can even remember being in your class in 2010 and being overwhelmed with the workload of school, to be honest, and then the elections coming up, and I had been very disciplined about voting, and it was the first time that I just felt it was too much work. I didn't know any of the candidates. It just felt like I just was exhausted, and I was going to take this round off.
Now, Andrew, you made a very smart decision, and we have an image of the North Carolina Central University School of Law. That's a historically black law school. Andrew is one of our Caucasian students in the school. Everyone's allowed to go to state school. And you were in Constitutional Law 1 and 2 with me. Now, I taught there from 09 to 10 before I joined the permanent faculty at Campbell University over in Raleigh across town. What year did you finish North Carolina Central?
In 12.
In 2012. So you had about a decade of thinking and acting. You were doing your own civic action for your own property and so forth. In is it the town of Chapel Hill or Carrboro where you wound up running for office? What municipality? And we have a picture that can be shown of the map that shows where your North Carolina House district you were running for is. We have two images of that, of the map of the district. Yes, Mr. Dykers, tell us where
it's House District 56. It's the Chapel Hill, Carrboro area.
Chapel Hill, Carrboro and Chapel Hill are liberal bastions, but we have an independent street here too, though, because that's the seat. There you see it in North Carolina on your screens. It's the Research Triangle region with lots of high-tech, highly educated folks. Couple of the great universities of America, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Duke University, just down 15501 and some turns, and not too far from there, North Carolina State, North Carolina Central's in the region, and some colleges like Meredith and Shaw and others, St. Augustine's. So here you are in a place of free thinkers. I taught there for 7 years. That's a region of free thinking people of a great racial history, frankly, of a black corporate middle class and education and culture, white interaction. Du Bois was very complimentary. So it seems like you had a great kumbaya environment for a political everyman like you to come right in and win. What happened?
Well, I think that one of the big hurdles is there's a common knowledge gap in terms of the sheer numbers of independents. So a lot of well-intentioned, democracy-minded people haven't really had that light bulb go off for them, recognizing the extent to which independents are unrepresented and frankly suppressed in our
You are a political independent, registered as such. Understood. You are an educated man in constitutional law and other law. Again, we have a picture of North Carolina Central, the law building there. Excellent facility, and your education prior to that. So you were prepared and equipped. You ran into some roadblocks, and you decided, was it 2022, that you were going to take the plunge and run as an independent to be a state legislator, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so you had some support from some people. What was the first step in and to get on the ballot? You have to get on the ballot.
Yes.
So what did you do first as a matter of organization?
Well, the challenge is I had to collect 2,320 signatures, and physical signatures, not digital signatures. And therein, opens the door to the conversation of why we don't have any independent representation.
That's a big hurdle. That's a big hurdle. Are Democrats and Republicans in their respective primaries required to obtain signatures to get on the ballot in North Carolina?
No, they simply have to go down to the Board of Adjustment, file a notice of candidacy, and pay a very modest fee. For my race, it would have been approximately $140.
Why do independents have to garner signatures in the first place, to say nothing of the thousands of signatures required?
Well, if you ask the status quo, they'll give you one answer, but I'm going to give you my answer.
Yes, I want yours.
To start.
This is my show. I want Andrew's answer.
Yes, sir. The reason that independents have to collect the signatures is because during Jim Crow, after the 15th Amendment and black men had got the right to vote and women were fighting for the same, the two parties had to figure out how they were going to control this expanding electorate. They could no longer prevent black men and soon to be all women from voting. So they had to make sure that the two parties were the only political game in town.
A two-party system reinforced, along with elements of trying to keep out traditionally blocked persons, constitutionally blocked in the case of women, where we had to have the 19th Amendment to let them vote in the early part of the last century, around 1920. And then we have the blacks who were barred from voting for the longest, then intimidated. In fact, there was a fusion government of wonderful white and black people in Wilmington, North Carolina, which used to be the largest city in the state, at the turn of the century, and that got thwarted by a bunch of white supremacists. So here we have a machine. It looks like the handiwork is still operating, though I'm not going to pretend North Carolina doesn't have a whole lot of black elected officials. So, the African Americans now become Democrats and Republicans like everybody else, and yet and still you have this large number of people in North Carolina like you who are registered. I'm a registered independent as of 2017 in Washington, D.C. State law is what governs election law. I don't get to vote in any primaries in the Washington, D.C. partisan elections because I'm a registered independent. So I have to do that sacrifice. You have to sacrifice 2,300 signatures and all of that just to get on a ballot. What happened?
Yes.
So you can finish the history about why there's a lockup shutout in this two-party system, bought and paid for now, which it is. So here you are, trying to be a good citizen. What happened?
Yes, well, I'm hearing you on, and part of what you're bringing up raises some of the complexity with this subject. So, people, when you're trying to educate folks, there's the issue that you have when you're talking about voting in the primaries, and that's a very real issue that independent voters face all across the nation, with a whole different set of rules all across the nation. But most of my effort has been focused on, and again, that's a very real piece of work that people are attending to, and I respect. But then there's also the matter of the candidates themselves getting onto the ballot. And that's where most of my energy has been focused on, looking at the separate and unequal treatment of independent candidates in their effort to run for office.
Mm-hmm. And so you got a lot of signatures. You got a lot of signatures. Tell us how the drive went and how it wound up and what was gained from the experience, at least.
Yes, sir. To be honest, going in, I had no idea what sort of, how much support I was going to get. I have some friends in the neighborhood, but when you're challenged to get 2,000 physical signatures of people who are in your district, it's a very tall task. So I mailed a letter to registered independents, sort of explaining the history of this process and why I'm against it and how it's affecting our democracy and society. And I gave people a signature form to return, and I received nearly 1,000 signatures back. And but that's well short of this arbitrary number that the government has assigned. And and that was really the end of the campaign. And just failing to.
Okay, so let's look at what I'm going to call specific democracy here. If democracy is about representative reflection and a fair reflection of the people and an ability to articulate people, and we have Republican form as well, where you elect people to represent you. But at the end of the day, there's supposed to be a reflection of what voters are looking for and citizens themselves.
Yes.
So what percentage of the North Carolina electorate are independent registered?
Yeah, that's a huge point. The independents in North Carolina are the largest voting bloc. There are like 2.6 million independents, which outnumbers both Democrats and Republicans.
Did everybody hear that? I want to put a pin there. North Carolina is a state that could be like a prototypical America. You've got the coastal culture. You've got the Appalachian Mountains over in the western part of the state. You got Big Boom, Charlotte, that now has roughly 3 million in the metro area. You have the educated center of Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, which is like a miniature Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas type Route 128, Boston, and Dulles Tech Corridor. Those are like the big five with technology. So you've got that going in the middle of the state. You've got a very healthy pro-business climate. You've got a progressive and also really an accommodationist, and I mean that in the most positive way it can be read. Black people, you've got independent black colleges that are private. You've got public support for black colleges, about, I think, 5 historically black. So you've got a great cross-section. North Carolina is a battleground state, like Ohio, like Pennsylvania, and sometimes even Michigan, in our national politics. So how many people live there? Maybe 10 million now, the population of North Carolina. It's a big state. North Carolina is a big state. And yet, the plurality of people, meaning the largest bloc, if people are divided in 3, Democrats, Republicans, registered independents are the biggest. Is that what you're telling our viewers, Andrew Dykers?
Yes, sir, that's the fact.
So how many members of the state house in the state legislature are elected, the elected officials in the state legislature are independent? Right. Zero. Huh, that's interesting. Do you know how many members of the state house, and it's bicameral, as I recall, how many members?
No, don't go doing this to me.
I won't. I said I wouldn't do gotcha. So the point is, there are scores of seats in this vast state with millions of people. And yet, the plurality of whom are independent, and yet zero represent. If this were racial, we'd be amending the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
If it were gendered, even if it were sexual orientation, they'd be amending the Constitution.
Yes, sir. That's where the work is.
Amending the Constitution?
No, I'm saying what you're tapping into is is where the real work is right now, is that the court is not recognizing political affiliation as being protected under the 14th Amendment, and that just cannot fly.
Talk to me, brother, talk to me. This is my student, my student. Did you hear what he just said? Repeat it. I told you, he's living constitutional law. I'm loving this. Go ahead and say it again.
It's the truth. The government cannot systematically divide us into groups and then tell us that the groups aren't protected by the Constitution. It's just insane. There's no.
And when you say the government has divided us into groups and they are enforced, you're talking about the traditional two-party framework that's not even in the Constitution by name. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I'm more specifically even referring to the voter registration process, where we are then divided into the groups. And we've become, this process has become so ingrained in our society that most people don't even question this notion. There's an innocent need to register voters, but there's a nefarious part in dividing us into tribes.
You go.
And that nefarious part was born during Jim Crow, when the two parties were clinging to their power. They entrenched themselves, and we've been stuck with it ever since. And you can see the dysfunction that's just spread like a cancer in our system.
It has. Go ahead. We got time because we were 15 minutes late on the air today, but my wonderful engineer got he got everything together that I got to him a little later. So we've got some time, Andrew. You tell me we got 13 and a half minutes left. So you tell what needs to be told here to our 750,000 viewers.
Well, I just, it can't stand, and it's spreading so gradually over time. So when this first happens, this is, we're talking 100 plus years ago, and it's not the same in every state. It's a little different across the country, but it's basically a wave. And this system takes hold, and and the two parties really are dominant. But when you look at the statistics, year after year, gradually every year, the percentage of independents goes up. Mm-hmm. And it's going more and more and more. And now we've hit this tipping point where now the independents are outnumbering Democrats and Republicans.
And so yes, go ahead.
Well, so your point about fair reflection is becoming more and more obvious for people to see. Like, you just can't.
And what I call it political constipation. Because people they need to have something move, and there's lockup. And what I'm referring to is, you see this in, for example, the election of 2016. So many registered Democrats voted for the socialist, who's not even a Democrat, in that primary. Bernie's really an independent, Bernie Sanders. I remember Jim Jeffords went independent, and so did Joseph Lieberman. And they won, and I think Manchin may be looking at something like that. But the fact is, people were going for Donald Trump, who rolled over all the establishment Republicans except Ted Cruz. The people, even within the parties, are hungry for people who break out of this Republicatic, to quote Ralph Nader, who's a Green Party, third party person. The people are yearning and itching. They need a political laxative. And I would say that what you're doing with Good Thoughts is just the medicine that we need. Go to www.goodthoughts.us and look at what Andrew Dykers is thinking about there from his experience. You didn't get on the ballot, but you got the signatures and you got some people. That's what I call a movement, Andrew Dykers, especially with the people power instead of the purse power. President Obama was prophetic about one thing in particular here, and that's when he looked at that joint session of Congress and said, this Citizens United decision is terrible, that the Supreme Court again, that they did. Because now private companies are going to pay for the elections, and we Democrats are going to have to do it too. And they did. President Obama went out and raised $1 billion to get reelected in 2012. And that I've come to tell you, that $1 billion wasn't coming from small $25 collegiate donors. They didn't own that campaign. And so you may wonder, why are there a couple of entrenched octogenarian type folk? Is that the most appealing to people who are front runners we can find in great big growing young America today with new ideas and new technology? No, what it is, people have made their political investments. And they have put all kinds of money, intergenerational wealth transfers in the party. Yesterday, Andrew, I was as confused as I've ever been by a political email. I actually contribute to people, my friends who run for office, people I went to school with, people, sometimes it's even a Republican, people I believe are good people with a good mindset, I will vote for. So I wind up on all of these donation lists. Yesterday, I got an email that had Governor Wes Moore of Maryland at the top. And then it was Andy Beshear, who I went to school with in Kentucky, who's the governor of Kentucky, asking for money for his election campaign in Kentucky. And I got confused because it said Governor Wes Moore, and I said, wait a minute, the Act Blue or somebody's crossed the wires. And I thought, well, let me get it. Then I was like, wait a minute, it's the Susu. It's a political Susu. They're now all trading off each other's money in this locked up corporate system that we have.
Oh my goodness.
Did you have a super PAC working for Andrew Dykers for state legislature? Who supported you?
No, it was a very shoestring effort. You know, I spent mostly my own money to mail out the flyer. I didn't ask for any money, but I did, and I can appreciate there's people who might criticize that, but I was trying to, you know, I don't really believe that people should have to be spending money. I don't like the notion that money's in it to begin with, and so yeah, I didn't ask, but when they put a stamp on the envelope, I ended up that's a contribution under North Carolina law, and so I actually ended up with more contributors than the winner in a technical matter, and then. You know,
so you heard the political accounting, folks. In political accounting, putting a stamp on an envelope is a political contribution. Ergo, Andrew Dykers had at least 1,000 donors. That's political accounting in North Carolina. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah, and you know, so it just it shows the arbitrary nature of the signature collection hurdle. And then on the larger
but Andrew, I want to stop there and spot an issue before you go on. Hold that thought. That almost seems, see, I think campaign finance, that the financing regime is a trap so that people make mistakes and get caught up legally. And so I almost feel like that's a way to ensnare an independent, a backdoor into having donors and having to do all kinds of extra reporting and or all of that. That becomes a barrier to entry in and of itself in an avenue 100%. Of fake discipline like they'll be doing in the system that
100%. I'm a licensed attorney, and I had every intention of doing everything perfectly right, and I still made mistakes.
Yeah. And, you have to hire a high-priced K Street law firm in order to read the signatures. It's crazy.
Yes, it's definitely very difficult, and that I did find that to be extremely unfair. The independents, in addition to having this extra challenge of collecting the signatures, they still have to abide by the exact same strict campaign finance reporting requirements of everyone else.
And was that the point you were making before I interrupted? I want you to get that other point out if you haven't made it on the idea of, I think, representation and design of the system, Democrat design. But go ahead, just whatever else is on your mind, Andrew. We're going to open the phone lines for Andrew Dykers with just a few minutes left as he explains whatever else is on his mind. I was talking about lockup, and I do have a question, but if you have something else to get out, Andrew, because I did interrupt you, please do. Callers, you can dial 301-429-9247. We don't have a lot of time. We can probably take one call if somebody would like to call, but we've got a full plate here, and we've got about 6 minutes left. 301-429-9247. Andrew, any more before I ask one more question?
I wasn't exactly sure if you wanted me to return to talking about political affiliation and its connection to the 14th Amendment. Or,
yes, that's helpful to help people realize that in a way, we all have been hemmed in. Even if you're a happily registered Democrat, that may affect the inability of independents to articulate their political will, may be why the Democratic Party has to contend with Bernie Sanders. You know, I can actually understand why Debbie Wasserman Schultz handled him the way she did, even though I voted for him in the North Carolina primary, which I did. I voted for all kinds of people in 2016 and 2008 as well. And so, again, political homelessness is a problem. For those of us who don't feel that very many people at all are really on point as a matter of what the country needs at a particular moment. But Yeah, the issue of the 14th Amendment, voters having a person's of choice and fair reflection, and the fact that you have this sophisticated state where you've got a plurality of voters being registered independents, which means most of them have walked away from their parties, unless it's a lot of young new people who registered independent from the time they were eligible to register.
And even if they are young, we have to respect that these are adults making adult decisions. The law has forced adults to make a decision. They made the decision. They chose the independent or unaffiliated category, and then the law treats them differently. I think most people understand the notion of equal treatment under the law to mean that everyone is treated the same, but I don't think most people, non-attorneys, realize that the courts have approached the 14th Amendment more in terms of groups, and usually that's regarding race or gender, and they've just have decided that political affiliation is something that they're not going to address, and that's what has to change. At some point, the court has to stop burying its head in the sand, stop hiding behind the language of political question and this sort of thing, and deal with the facts. I have some optimism about it, though, because even though the court is politicized, it's also our most independent branch. And honestly,
I'm going to say, especially elected judges who handle these. 90% of judges are elected. They do a much better job in civil rights cases and even constitutional cases than people give them credit for. And they're elected and accountable. 90% of our judges in America are elected. And Andrew, I'm going to have to put a pin in it there. We're going to have Andrew Dykers back on our air because we're going to have to raise the question, is the system broken? Or is it actually rigged and working the way it was supposed to, and we just weren't told that this is the kind of lockup and way that we were going to be in? We're also going to talk about Dr. Cornel West, who has just left the Green Party, and he's running for president as an independent. But we leave you today with our traditional departure, and that is the hymn of invitation. We here believe that we are providing information to you and dialogue and opening up space for you two to dialogue with us that might prove transformative, not just in your political sensibilities or legal understandings, but maybe even in your very moral fabric. So we end every week with a hymn of invitation. In episode 1, we had a technical glitch whereby the hymn of invitation, He Leadeth Me, which is a meditation on the 23rd Psalm, did not play out over our air. And so this week we're going to try that again, and it comes from the wonderful All Saints Cathedral Anglican out of Nairobi, Kenya, which has an excellent multifaceted ministry, a vibrant music program, a recently improved organ that is one of the best on the continent of Africa, and an outstanding director of music and staff, and choirs as well. Their Lux Eterna service from just a few weeks ago aired on YouTube. This is presented for educational purposes. We leave you with our hymn of invitation, He Leadeth Me, O Blessed Thought. And we wish you all the best in this weekend as you go into the world and make your own way and make your own mark. And we pray that you have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a productive week ahead. Thank you.